he told her. People like you won't even know what to wear. A careless joke to him, a wound she carried home in silence. But the night she stepped into that ballroom, wearing a gown she stitched from the scraps of a life that had almost broken her, the millionaire who once looked straight through her, forgot every word he ever said. Because there are moments when the world is forced to stop and finally see the woman it chose to overlook. Who was she, really? How many storms had she survived to stand there with that kind of quiet grace? And why did the man who thought she was invisible suddenly lose his voice at the sight of her? Stay with this story. It doesn't just change the way you see her, it might change the way you see everyone. Snow had just begun to drift down over Denver, soft at first, as if the sky wasn't quite sure it wanted to commit to a storm. From the 25th floor of the Caldwell Children's Foundation office, the city looked like a map of scattered embers, streetlights glowing beneath a thin veil of winter haze, cars crawling along frozen streets in slow, deliberate lines. Inside, the warmth of the office glowed against the glass walls, and the faint scent of cedar from a holiday-themed diffuser hung in the air. Ethan Caldwell stood beside the conference table, jacket draped over a chair, the sleeves of his crisp white shirt rolled neatly to his elbows. He was 48, the kind of man whose presence filled a room before his voice ever did, self-assured. Fit, salt and pepper hair cut close, a look of practiced confidence that came easily to someone accustomed to steering million-dollar conversations. He tapped the edge of a glossy portfolio, layouts, budgets, and seating charts for the hospital's black tie fundraiser gala. "If this thing gets any bigger," he said, half smiling at the events director, "we're going to need our own convention center." A few staff members laughed politely. Caterers in pressed shirts moved in and out with sample menus. The head of events, Sylvia Marks, held up a stack of cream-colored envelopes. "These are the invitations for all departments, including night staff. Per your request, every employee gets one." "Good," Ethan said, distractedly reviewing the vendor list. "It looks inclusive on the reports." Sylvia raised a brow. "You think any of them will come?" Ethan let out a low chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. "You can send them invitations if you want," he said, "but most of them won't even know what to wear." It was meant lightly, just an offhand comment tossed into the hum of the room, barely louder than the shuffle of paper and the clink of water glasses. But people heard it. A few administrators gave small, awkward smiles, unsure whether to laugh or look away. The caterer nearest the door stiffened, pretending he hadn't. Ethan, already turning a page, didn't notice the ripple left behind his words. Out in the hallway, a janitor's cart squeaked to a stop. Claire Morrison had been pushing it toward the staff restroom, her gloved hands still damp from scrubbing down the break-room sinks. At 38, Claire carried herself with the quiet fatigue of someone who had learned to survive long nights and long years. Her auburn hair was pulled into a low twist to keep it out of her face, a few strands escaping around her temples. Her green custodial polo was washed thin, the hospital logo nearly faded. A ring of keys jingled at her hip. She hadn't meant to overhear anything. She rarely noticed conversations on this floor. She was used to being invisible around executives, but this sentence slipped through the half-open door and pinned her in place. Most of them won't even know what to wear. She felt it land sharp, small, effective. A burr under the skin. Claire's eyes dropped instinctively to her sneakers, soles worn smooth from years of disinfectant and concrete floors. She glanced at her ID badge, the laminated edges slightly frayed, the photo taken on a day she'd barely slept. The words "Environmental Services" printed bold beneath her name. For a moment, her throat tightened. It wasn't rage, not even surprise, just that old familiar ache, the kind she'd learned to swallow before it sparked anything dangerous. Inside the conference room, laughter bubbled faintly. Not cruel. Not aimed at her, but careless. That was always the worst kind. Claire braced her hands on the cart's handle. The rubber grip was cold under her fingers, a reminder of work waiting to be done. Bleach, ammonia, stainless steel polish. Things she understood, things she could manage. She didn't look into the room. Didn't let herself imagine whether Ethan or any of the others would recognize her if she did. She knew the answer. She'd watched him walk past her at least a dozen times over the past year, without a flicker of acknowledgement. People like him lived above the floor tiles she scrubbed. They floated through bright offices and catered lunches while she wiped down the fingerprints they left behind. She took a breath, long and steady, letting the sting settle into something quieter, smaller, survivable. Then she pushed the cart forward, wheels squeaking toward the restroom. But as she walked, the words followed. Clinging. Won't even know what to wear. She tried to brush them off, tried to tuck them away with all the other comments she'd learned not to let in. Still, they clung stubbornly like the little threads she used to trim from wedding gowns back when her hands were steadier, when her life was different. That memory rose uninvited. A bride standing in front of the mirror in Claire's old alteration shop, silk pooling at her feet while Claire knelt with a pincushion strapped to her wrist, smoothing fabric with expert fingers. Back then, she'd known every cut, every hem, every stitch that made a woman stand tall. Back then, she had known exactly what to wear. She blinked the memory away. Life was different now. Smaller. But she had learned to live within its borders. Claire reached the restroom, pushed the door open with her elbow, and guided the cart inside. The hum of the ceiling vent filled the space. Steady and impersonal, she restocked soap, wiped the counters, emptied the trash movements, practiced enough to do on autopilot. Still, her heartbeat wouldn't settle. The sentence looped again. Not shouted, not cruel, just thoughtless. She stood for a moment with her gloved hands braced on the sink, eyes fixed on her own reflection in the streak-free mirror she'd just polished. Under the harsh fluorescent light, she looked tired, older than 38, as if the years had carved something out of her. But her gaze held steady, brown eyes with a flick of determination she rarely let out. "You're fine," she whispered, barely a breath. "It's just words." But she knew better. Words, especially the careless ones, had weight. And that one had just shifted something deep inside her. Not enough to break her. Not enough to change her course, but enough to make her pause just long enough to feel a small, surprising spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Not anger. Not pride. Something quieter. The faintest flicker of refusal. She tossed the used paper towel into the bin, pushed her cart out of the restroom, and moved down the hallway with steady, purposeful steps. The city lights glowed beyond the tall windows, snow drifting harder now, tapping softly against the glass. As Claire turned the corner, she didn't look back at the conference room. But she carried the words with her, tucked into the deepest pocket of her thoughts. A burr in the chest, a tiny shift in weight, the beginning of something she didn't yet recognize, something that would not stay quiet for long. The drive home always felt longer at night, especially after a shift spent bending, lifting, scrubbing. Denver's roads stretched quietly beneath the dim yellow glow of street lamps, the snow now falling in heavier sheets. Claire kept both hands on the steering wheel of her old blue Honda, the heater humming weakly, the windshield wipers dragging in tired arcs. She lived 30 minutes from the hospital, on the edge of the city where the houses sat low and scattered, each with its own patch of yard that winter never seemed to forgive. It was close to midnight when she pulled into her driveway. The porch light flickered to life on a motion sensor, casting a soft cone of warmth over the thin layer of snow. Claire paused for a second in the driver's seat, rubbing her temples, letting the quiet of the night settle around her. Nobody barked orders into their phones, or made jokes about people like her not knowing what to wear. Out here, it was still. She pushed the car door open, her knee cracking softly as she stood. Her breath puffed into the air in white clouds. She carried her lunchbox and keys to the front door, nudged it open with a shoulder, and stepped into the dim living room. The house smelled faintly of lavender detergent and something warm, maybe soup from earlier. She hung her hospital polo shirt on a hook by the door, smoothing the fabric as if it deserved better than fluorescent lights and bleach fumes. Then she sank onto the edge of the couch to untie her shoes. Her feet ached, a dull, familiar throb that pulsed with her heartbeat. She rubbed them slowly, working her thumb along the arch, breathing through the soreness. She told herself it was just another night, that it didn't matter what anyone said, but the words lingered anyway. Most of them won't even know what to wear. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to let it go. But the sentence threaded through her thoughts like a snag she couldn't smooth out. When she stood again, she headed down the narrow hallway to the spare bedroom, the one she always kept half shut, not out of secrecy but out of tenderness. It was the room that belonged to the woman she used to be. She pushed the door open. Soft moonlight spilled through the blinds, landing on the old Singer sewing machine that sat on a sturdy wooden table. Beside it, her dress form stood draped with muslin, a couple of pins glinting near the neckline. Cardboard boxes lined the wall, each labeled in her handwriting: bridal, alterations, linens, patterns, zippers and notions. Claire stepped inside as if entering a chapel. She ran her fingers along the top of the sewing machine, feeling the faint scratches left from years of guiding satin, chiffon, lace. She had spent so many nights here cutting fabric, fitting brides, calming jittery nerves with the same steady hands she used to thread needles. Before life shifted, before bills drowned her, before Mark got sick, her throat tightened at the memory of him, Mark sitting in the recliner, blanket over his knees, smiling at her as she worked. "Make sure you charge enough, Claire. People pay for magic." She could still hear his laugh, that soft, warm chuckle that carried her through dark days. She had closed the shop 6 months after he passed. Rent had risen, customers dwindled, and the hospital had offered health insurance, benefits she couldn't afford to refuse. She'd taken the janitor position out of necessity, promising herself it was temporary. Temporary could stretch a long time when grief and bills piled on top of each other. She touched the sleeve of a half-pinned project on the dress form, smoothing the fabric out of instinct. Her fingers remembered the movements, even if the rest of her life had forgotten the meaning behind them. A door closed gently somewhere in the house. "Mama?" A voice called softly. Claire turned to see her daughter, Hannah, standing in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. 17, with long brown hair pulled into a messy bun and tired eyes that somehow still sparkled. She'd been at the library studying for finals. "You're home late," Claire said. "So are you," Hannah teased, dropping her backpack onto the bed. "I heated the leftover chicken and rice." "Want some?" "Starving," Claire admitted. They walked to the kitchen together. Hannah grabbed a pair of plates and popped the leftovers into the microwave. The machine hummed as it rotated, filling the small space with warmth. "School, okay?" Claire asked. "Yeah, I think I nailed the anatomy quiz." Hannah grinned. "At this rate, community college won't know what hit them." "I'm proud of you," Claire said, and meant it. Hannah plopped the plates onto the table and sat, crossing her legs under her. They ate quietly at first, the comfort of routine filling the space. Then Hannah nudged her with her elbow. "Your knees bothering you again?" "A little," Claire said. "One day, I'll be a nurse," Hannah joked, "and you won't be able to hide anything from me." Claire laughed softly. "I'm counting on it." They talked about small things: rent, groceries, Hannah's plans for volunteer hours at the hospital. Claire didn't mention the comment she overheard. No point in passing her hurt onto her daughter, but even as she smiled, the sentence replayed in her mind, quiet but persistent. "Most of them won't even know what to wear." Later, after Hannah went to shower, Claire returned to her bedroom. She opened her closet, pushing aside work clothes and thrift store sweaters until she reached a long plastic garment bag pressed against the back wall. Her breath caught. She slid it out carefully, unzipped it halfway. Inside lay the unfinished navy evening gown she'd started years ago, back when she still believed she'd have reason to dress up someday. The bodice was half-beaded, delicate clusters of crystals catching the dim lamplight. Heavy and elegant. It smelled faintly of cedar from the closet and something else, memory, perhaps. Claire touched the neckline, tracing the curve of a dream she had once stitched for herself. Her eyes burned. She zipped it closed again. Slow, deliberate. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But as she hung it back up, the fabric whispered against her fingers, like a reminder or a question that she didn't quite understand. She turned off the light, the garment bag swaying gently in the dark, and stepped out of the room, feeling both heavier and strangely lighter, as if something old had shifted inside her. Something she wasn't ready to name. Not yet. By the time Claire clocked in the next evening, the hospital buzzed with an energy that only big events ever seemed to summon. Even the fluorescent-lit break room felt unusually bright. A corkboard near the microwave stood newly decorated with a neatly arranged row of cream envelopes, each pinned at perfect angles. A handwritten sign read, "All staff invited Caldwell Children's Fund Gala. Guests welcome." Black tie. Someone had drawn a little bow tie in the corner, as if trying to make the whole thing feel more welcoming. It didn't work. A few night shift nurses stood, gathered around the board, coffee cups in hand. One of them, Janine, a short woman with a quick laugh, snorted as she grabbed an invitation. "Black tie?" she said. "If I show up in my scrubs, think they'll escort me straight to the service elevator?" The others burst into laughter. "A gala," another muttered. "That's rich. Who do they think we are? Doctors' wives?" "Please," Janine said. "I get nervous just walking through the lobby when the donors are here." Claire stood behind her cart in the doorway, listening quietly. She didn't intend to eavesdrop, it just happened naturally, the way people like her often observe the world from a half-step removed. Janine spotted her and brightened. "Hey, Claire. Grab one. You can use it as a bookmark or something." The group chuckled, not unkindly. They liked Claire. But they, too, knew the unspoken rule of places like this. Some invitations were only for show. Claire stepped forward and took one envelope between her fingers. The paper felt heavier than she expected, a soft weight, almost velvety. She turned it over, noticing the embossed gold lettering. Her own name wasn't written on it, it just said "All Staff," but the envelope still felt strangely personal in her hand. "Gonna frame it?" One nurse teased gently. Claire smiled, small but polite. But she didn't walk to the trash can. She didn't leave the envelope on the table like the others. Throughout her shift, she kept feeling it there like a warm coin against her ribs, like a thought she wasn't ready to admit she was having. Near the end of the night, she paused in the stairwell between floors, catching her breath. The invitation called to her. She pulled it out and held it under the weak stairwell light, tracing the edges. A gala. Her last gala-like event had been over 15 years ago, when she attended a bridal expo as a vendor, showcasing some of her alteration work. Back then, she'd worn a simple navy dress she'd stitched herself, hair curled loosely around her shoulders, Mark beaming at her from the crowd as if she were the most beautiful woman in the room. She blinked the memory away. When her shift ended, Claire drove home through the quiet Denver streets, the envelope resting on the passenger seat. At every red light, she glanced at it. At stop signs, at the long stretch of empty road leading into her neighborhood. It was ridiculous. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like a door she hadn't knocked on in years. At home, she set her keys on the counter and placed the envelope on the kitchen table, as if it weighed more than it should. Hannah wasn't home yet, she had an after-school tutoring session, so the house felt especially still. Claire stood for a long moment, staring at the invitation. She could ignore it. Throw it in the drawer with grocery receipts and forgotten coupons. Pretend she never saw it, but she didn't. When Hannah came home half an hour later, the first thing she noticed was the envelope. "What's that?" she asked, dropping her backpack onto the chair. "A gala invitation," Claire said lightly. "The hospital gives them to all employees. PR, you know." Hannah picked it up, reading it with wide eyes. "Mom, this looks fancy." "It's not for us," Claire said, reaching for a dish towel as if the conversation could end right there. But Hannah didn't let it go. She held the envelope against her chest with both hands. "Mom." Claire let out a gentle laugh. "Honey, I don't have anything to wear." "You used to dress brides for a living," Hannah reminded her. "You helped women feel beautiful on the most important day of their lives. You know more about formal wear than anyone in that building. That was a long time ago." Claire began rinsing a mug, but her voice carried the weight of years. "So?" Hannah walked toward the hallway. "Hannah," Claire started, but the girl was already gone. A moment later, she returned. In her arms was the plastic garment bag, the unfinished navy gown. She laid it gently on the bed, smoothing the garment bag with reverence. "You always made other women feel like they belonged in fancy rooms," Hannah said quietly. Don't you think you deserve one night too? Claire felt something tug inside her chest, sharp, tender, too honest. She sat on the bed, hands trembling just slightly as she unzipped the garment bag. The gown shimmered even under the weak bedroom lamp, the beadwork catching light like tiny stars. It was elegant, classic, a piece of the woman she used to be. A woman she wasn't sure she still knew. She heard Ethan's voice again, soft, careless, cutting. Most of them won't even know what to wear. Her breath shivered out. Hannah sat beside her. Mom, go. Just one night. Do it for you. The room fell into a deep, stretched silence, the kind where decisions are born. Claire reached for the RSVP card tucked inside the invitation envelope. Her hand shook. Just a little. Just enough to reveal how much it mattered. She picked up a pen. She circled, attending. A slow, steady inhale. A soft exhale. And for the first time in years, something inside her unfurled, small and brave and shimmering, like a stitch pulled taut in exactly the right place. Snow clung to the edges of the pavement like a stubborn memory by the time Claire pulled into the driveway the next night. The house was dark except for the soft glow of a lamp Hannah had left on for her. Claire slipped inside, hung her jacket, and stood still for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around her shoulders. She could feel the weight of her decision settling deeper into her bones. Attending. The word still surprised her. She walked down the hallway to the spare bedroom, the little sanctuary she hadn't fully entered in years. Tonight, the air felt different, as if the room had been waiting for her. On the table, the Singer sewing machine gleamed faintly under the lamp. Claire ran her fingertips across the metal, feeling the familiar dips and ridges her hands knew as well as her own skin. She pulled out the box labeled Patterns, lifting the lid with the kind of care reserved for fragile things. The navy gown lay folded beside it, the beadwork shimmering quietly like a cluster of distant stars. All right, she whispered, drawing in a breath. Let's see what we can do. The first evening, she let the fabric out of the garment bag and draped it over the dress form. It hung with the same half-finished grace it had the day she abandoned it. The bodice needed more beading. The seams at the waist were loose. The hem was pinned unevenly from where she'd rushed to finish it years ago. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her sewing scissors, shorter now, dulled from time. She sat down and threaded a needle, squinting under the lamplight. Her hands weren't as steady as they used to be. The first stitch snagged. The second slid in smoother. By the 10th, her fingers remembered the rhythm, though her knuckles ached. She worked until nearly 2 in the morning. Stitch by stitch, the woman she used to be stirred in the half-lit room, hovering just behind her shoulder like a shadow she wasn't ready to look at directly. Over the next few nights, a quiet montage unfolded. After each shift cleaning hospital floors, Claire washed her hands carefully, rubbing lotion into cracked knuckles before settling in at her sewing table. Sometimes she reused lace salvaged from an old table runner, trimming it into delicate scallops that she appliqued along the neckline. Sometimes she sat cross-legged on the floor, taking in side seams by hand because she no longer had industrial machines to do the work for her. The old Singer's motor sputtered occasionally, protesting its age, but it kept going. So did she. At moments, fear crept in like a draft under the door. What if I walk in, and everyone knows I don't belong? What if I make a fool of myself? What if this dress doesn't hide who I really am, someone who lost more than she held on to? She tried to silence the thoughts, but they echoed anyway. On one especially quiet night, she paused mid-stitch, the needle motionless between her fingers. A memory washed over her, soft as worn cotton, the little bridal shop, the warmth of the old space heaters, the sound of bridesmaids laughing as she smoothed a gown over a young woman's hips. Mark, leaning in the doorway, hands in his pockets, smiling at her like she'd hung the moon herself. You make people feel beautiful, Claire, he'd told her once. Her breath hitched at the memory. She blinked quickly, letting the moment pass before returning to her work. Hannah was her anchor through it all. On Friday night, she knocked gently on the bedroom door. Can I help? Claire didn't look up from the gown. You have schoolwork. I can study later, Hannah said, slipping into the room. Besides, I found tutorials. She held up their cracked old tablet, the screen spiderwebbed, but functioning. "You're going to let me do your hair," Hannah declared with warm certainty. Claire laughed. "Oh? I am?" "Yes, and makeup. And we're going to practice." "Sit." Claire sighed, but obeyed, climbing into the chair. Curling strands of hair around a cheap plastic wand she'd found on clearance. She concentrated so hard that her tongue poked out slightly at the corner of her mouth, the way it had when she learned to tie her shoes at age 5. "Mom," she said after a moment, voice soft, "you deserve this. You know that, right?" One of mine teeteries, Claire swallowed. "I'm not sure I do." "Well, I'm sure enough for both of us." Her daughter's confidence steadied her more than any stitch she'd sewn. On the 5th evening of alterations, Claire finally reached the point she'd been avoiding, the moment of truth. "Okay," Hannah said, standing beside the dress form, hands on her hips. Claire hesitated. Her fingers brushed the fabric, trailing down the curve of the bodice. "I don't know," she whispered. "Mom," Hannah said softly, "you've done harder things." She wasn't wrong. Claire stepped into the gown. The fabric whispered as it slid over her hips, settling into place. Hannah zipped the back slowly, carefully, almost reverently. "Ready?" her daughter asked. "No," Claire said, "but go ahead." They moved to the hallway, narrow and dim, where an old full-length mirror hung slightly crooked. Claire stood before it, but kept her eyes lowered for a breath or two, afraid of what she might see or not see. Then, slowly, she lifted her gaze, and the world went still. The woman reflected back wasn't glamorous, not in a red carpet way. The dress wasn't couture, but the lines were elegant. The navy fabric draped with quiet dignity. Her posture, straightened by instinct, added a softness, a strength she'd forgotten lived inside her. She saw her age, yes. The fine lines around her eyes, the wear in her shoulders, but she also saw something else. A spark, a history, a woman who had once created beauty with her own hands, a woman who had lost and survived and kept moving, a woman worth seeing. Her vision blurred. Tears filled her lashes, trembling there like dewdrops. Behind her, Hannah slipped her arms around her waist and rested a cheek against her shoulder. "There she is," her daughter whispered. Claire closed her eyes, letting the words settle. There she is. She wasn't sure who the she was, the past Claire, the present one, or the possibility of something new. But for the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were all the same woman. She pressed her hand lightly to the mirror, leaving a faint imprint on the glass. And for a long, fragile moment, she didn't move. The night of the gala arrived cold and sharp, the kind of winter evening where every breath felt like it could crystallize mid-air. Downtown Denver shimmered beneath a canopy of streetlights, the sidewalks slick from melted snow, refreezing into thin sheets. The historic Lexington Hotel towered over the street like an illuminated cathedral. Through its doors, warmth and wealth seemed to spill into the night, catching on the hems of fur coats and velvet gowns. Claire stood at the bus stop a block away, her gloved hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the fabric of her navy gown beneath her long wool coat. She didn't own evening heels anymore. Instead, she wore the nicest black flats she had, their soles gripping uncertainly at the icy pavement. Hannah stood beside her, a knit scarf wrapped around her neck, checking the directions on her phone. "We get off here," Hannah said, pointing toward the hotel. Claire nodded, even though her throat was tight. She had survived night shifts, grief, bills that threatened to drown her. She had seen worse than winter wind and overbright chandeliers. But the thought of walking into a ballroom filled with Denver's wealthiest donors made her stomach twist like a knot pulled too tight. They stepped off the bus, boots crunching in the thin layer of snow. The cold bit her cheeks, but Hannah looped her arm through her mother's. "You look beautiful," she whispered. Claire managed a smile that only reached halfway. "Let's hope I don't trip on the sidewalk." They walked carefully along the block, dodging slush and small puddles of melted snow. Cars lined up near the hotel entrance, black SUVs, polished sedans, a few luxury models she didn't recognize. A valet ran to open a door for a couple in evening wear, the woman's silver gown shimmering like frost under the street lamps. Claire slowed, her breath caught. From here, she could already see the line of tuxedos moving through the revolving doors, the fur shawls draped over elegant shoulders, the glitter of jewelry that cost more than her monthly rent. Inside, there was warmth, music, chandeliers swaying with the hum of conversation. Her feet stopped moving. "I can't," she whispered. Hannah halted beside her. "Mom, this was a mistake." Claire looked down at her coat, at the worn spots on her gloves, at the faint scuffs on her shoes. "What was I thinking? I don't belong in there." A valet glanced in their direction, polite but puzzled, as if trying to figure out whether they were lost tourists or maybe staff from another department. "Mom," Hannah said again, gripping her arm tighter. "You do belong." But Claire's heart raced like it was trying to drag her back down the block, back to the bus stop, back to the version of herself who never took risks. Hannah stepped in front of her, forcing Claire to meet her eyes. "You walked through harder doors than this," Hannah said softly. "Hospital rooms, funeral homes, empty bank offices, and you kept going. This?" She gestured toward the revolving doors. "This is just a room with fancy carpet." The words lodged in Claire's chest, warm and steady. She swallowed. "I'm scared." "I know," Hannah said. "That's why I'm here." A gust of wind swept past them, tugging at Claire's coat. She clutched the invitation in her gloved hand, feeling the heavy cardstock press into her palm. All staff invited. Her name printed neatly on the RSVP card. She forced herself to take one slow step forward. Then another. At the entrance, the valet smiled politely. Claire opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "Yes," Hannah answered for both of them. They stepped inside the revolving door. Warmth enveloped them instantly, a rush of golden light, soft music from a distant string quartet, the scent of polished wood and pine. Claire's heart hammered so loud she could hardly hear the violin. Just ahead was the check-in table, draped in cream linen. 2 volunteers sat behind it, one sorting name tags, the other greeting guests with practiced smiles. Claire approached, holding out the invitation. The volunteer glanced at it, then at Claire, hesitating just a beat too long. "Name?" she asked, pen poised over a clipboard. "Claire Morrison." The volunteer scanned the list. Nothing. She flipped a page. Still nothing. Claire felt her stomach drop like an elevator descending too fast. The volunteer frowned. "And your address?" Claire gave it, each number sounding smaller and more fragile. Still nothing. Behind her, guests whispered greetings and laughter, their perfume and confidence filling the space. Claire could practically feel the distance between her life and theirs widening like a canyon. "It should be there," she murmured, voice barely audible. I RSVP'd. Hannah stepped closer, protective. The volunteer searched through a different stack of pages, and Claire's pulse tripled. She imagined having to turn around, imagined the humiliation of stepping back through the revolving doors. Imagined the valet's confused expression. Maybe this is the moment she should cut her losses and run. But then, "Oh," the volunteer said suddenly, eyes brightening. "Here you are. Miss Morrison, my apologies, you're in the employee guest list section. I should have checked that first." Claire let out a shaky breath. "Welcome," the volunteer added warmly, handing her a small gold pin shaped like a star. "We're glad you're here. Glad you're here." The words carried a weight they couldn't possibly understand. Claire took the pin with trembling fingers. Hannah squeezed her hand once, firm and proud. A velvet rope marked the entrance to the main ballroom. Beyond it, she could see the soft glow of chandeliers, hundreds of candles flickering on glittering tables, the swirl of gowns and tuxedos. It looked like a world she had only ever entered as a worker, never as a guest. She drew in a slow breath and stepped forward, past the rope, past the threshold, into the light. The door whispered closed behind her. She was inside. And for the first time all week, something in her chest began to unfurl, not fully, not confidently, but enough to make her wonder what might happen next. Enough to keep her moving. Warmth washed over Claire the moment she stepped past the velvet rope. It wasn't just the heat of the ballroom, it was the atmosphere, thick with the hum of voices, the soft glow of chandeliers, and the faint perfume of flowers arranged in tall crystal vases on every table. For a moment, she felt her breath catch, as if she'd stepped into a world made of candlelight and polished silver. The ballroom stretched wide beneath a ceiling painted with fading murals, cherubs, and clouds in soft pastel tones. Round tables draped in ivory linens filled the space, each one crowned with floating candles in glass cylinders. A jazz trio played near the stage, saxophone weaving gentle threads of melody through the air. Waiters in crisp black uniforms wove effortlessly between guests, balancing silver trays of champagne flutes that sparkled each time they caught the light. Claire paused just inside the entrance, taking everything in. Her hand instinctively adjusted the fabric of her navy gown, smoothing an imagined wrinkle. She wasn't used to wearing clothes that whispered when she moved, or to being in a room where every detail felt fine enough to hold between two fingers. People glanced her way soft, assessing glances meant to categorize as much as to admire. Some smiled politely, the way guests smile at strangers entering a party they've never seen before. Others frowned slightly, as if trying to place her face in a mental catalog of donors and board members. A few simply stared. Claire stayed near the edge of the room at first, walking slowly along the perimeter, her flats silent on the polished floor. Hannah trailed a few steps behind, offering quiet encouragement with every glance. "You're doing great," she whispered. Claire wasn't sure she believed her. Every step felt like walking through water resisting, heavy, and impossible to rush. Still, the music helped. The low hum of conversations blended into a comforting backdrop. Couples laughed softly. The clinking of forks and crystal draped through the room like small, elegant bells. She steadied her breathing and kept moving. Across the ballroom, the Caldwell Foundation's leadership circle gathered near the main stage. Ethan Caldwell stood among them, dressed in a black tuxedo that fit with the ease of someone who'd worn dozens of them. His bow tie had loosened slightly, giving him a relaxed, confident look like a man who knew the room belonged to him. He held a glass of sparkling water, engaged in conversation with a pair of potential donors. His gestures were smooth, practiced. He looked every bit the polished philanthropist people expected him to be. Claire didn't look in his direction, intentionally she didn't want to. Not yet. The memory of those words still lingered like an invisible bruise. Most of them won't even know what to wear. Instead, she focused on moving gracefully, her fingers brushing the silk of her dress. The overhead chandelier nearest her flickered warm gold, spilling down over her as she passed beneath it. For a brief, almost magical instant, the crystals caught in the fabric of her gown, sending a subtle sheen across the navy folds. It was that shimmer, simple, unassuming, but undeniably elegant, that reached Ethan's peripheral vision. He didn't react at first, just glanced, then looked again, and stopped entirely. His sentence evaporated mid-air, cut off as cleanly as a dropped violin string. The donors looked at him, confused, waiting for him to finish whatever point he'd been making. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. His gaze fixed on Claire, on the woman moving through the chandelier's light with quiet poise. On the dress that flowed like water around her legs, tailored so perfectly it could have been custom-made. On the curve of her posture, the gentle confidence in the line of her shoulders. He blinked. Once, twice, as if trying to understand whether she was real. "Ethan?" one of the donors prompted, lightly tapping his sleeve. "You were saying about the proposed expansion?" Ethan didn't respond. He didn't even hear. His expression, usually so controlled, softened into something unguarded, bare, almost reverent. His colleague leaned closer. "Ethan, you okay?" But Ethan's focus remained unbroken. He watched Claire step deeper into the room, Hannah beside her, both unaware of the quiet ripple they'd created. Guests turned to look as she passed, not because of extravagance, but because there was something unmistakably graceful about her. Something understated, elegant, and entirely unexpected. A nurse from the hospital who'd been invited stood near the buffet table and tilted her head, whispering to a friend, Who is she? Another guest murmured. Is she on the board? Someone else said, that dress. That's not store-bought. Claire felt the attention but didn't know what to do with it. Her heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird, and she forced herself to breathe slowly. She reached for a glass of water from a passing tray, fingers brushing the cool stem. Hannah whispered, Mom. Claire gave a tiny shake of her head, still not quite believing any of it. On the far side of the room, Ethan's colleague nudged him gently. Ethan. Earth to you. You were explaining the cost projections. But Ethan barely registered the words. His voice, when it finally returned, was quiet, almost strained. Who is she? His colleague followed his gaze. I have no idea. But she looks... Ethan swallowed, throat dry. Familiar, yes, but impossible. He'd walked past Claire Morrison dozens, no, hundreds of times. But never like this. Never seeing her. Never realizing the quiet dignity she carried under fluorescent lights and worn sneakers. Now she was bathed in chandelier light, her handmade gown catching sparks of gold. She wasn't invisible. Not tonight. Ethan's chest tightened, something shifting in him with slow, undeniable force. The man who once believed she wouldn't know what to wear now couldn't form a single coherent sentence as he watched her move. Claire paused near a table, her hand hovering lightly above a floral centerpiece as she admired the arrangement. Her profile glowed under the chandelier, the soft curls Hannah had styled, brushing her collarbone. Ethan exhaled. Barely a breath. His world tipped. And in that suspended moment between recognition and realization, something inside him cracked open. He didn't know her. Not truly, but he wanted to. Desperately. Claire, sensing nothing of the shift she'd caused, continued along the edge of the ballroom, her steps steady, her expression uncertain but brave. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the nerves and the fear, a small part of her began to understand. She belonged in this room. She always had. Ethan didn't excuse himself so much as drift away from his group. Though the investors barely noticed, he'd stopped contributing to the conversation anyway. Something in his steps had changed. The confidence was still there, but muted, tempered by uncertainty he couldn't quite name. His eyes never left Claire as he crossed the room. Claire sensed movement before she actually saw him. The soft buzz of chatter dimmed around her, muffled, as if she were underwater. When she finally turned, Ethan Caldwell, philanthropist, self-made millionaire, eloquent host of the evening, was standing a polite but intentional distance in front of her. "Good evening," he said, offering the same practiced smile she had seen him give donors, board members, visiting politicians. Only tonight, something about it failed to land cleanly. It felt fragile around the edges. She nodded. "Good evening. I'm Ethan Caldwell," he added, extending a hand. She shook it. "Claire. Just Claire." A flash of polite confusion flickered across his face. The subtle squint of a man sorting through a mental Rolodex of names and faces, trying to match hers to a memory that stubbornly refused to form. "Well, Claire," he said, still searching her expression for clues, "I'm glad you could join us this evening. The turnout's been wonderful this year. The children's wing will truly benefit." "It's an important cause," she replied. "The hospital does good work." He smiled again, warmer this time. More natural. "I agree." 1. For a heartbeat, they simply stood there, the crowd flowing around them like a slow-moving river. Claire felt oddly calm, the earlier nerves settling into something steadier. Ethan broke the silence first. "I hope I'm not being too forward, but your dress is incredible." His eyes followed the clean lines of the gown, the elegant seams, the carefully hand-sewn lace at the neckline. "Truly, I don't think I've seen anything like it tonight. Which boutique did you find it at? My sister would love something like this." Hannah, standing just behind Claire, pressed her lips together to hide a grin. Claire's smile came slow, soft. "I made it." "You made it?" Ethan repeated, blinking. "And sewed it," she added. His brows rose in genuine admiration. "That's remarkable. You're a designer, then?" Claire hesitated. "Not out of shame. out of choosing her moment, carefully choosing truth over comfort. I used to be, she said. He leaned in slightly, curious. Used to be? She met his eyes, steady and calm. These days, she took a breath. These days, I mop your floors. The words floated between them, gentle but unmistakably sharp. Ethan froze. It was the smallest shift, a tightening in his shoulders, the air catching in his throat, but Claire felt it ripple through the space around them. The room didn't notice, but he did. Every polished layer of ease he carried cracked just slightly. I'm on the night janitorial staff at the hospital, Mr. Caldwell, she continued, her tone soft, not accusatory. We've crossed paths before. There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth. And a quiet dignity. Ethan didn't speak. Color rose along his collar, climbing up his neck to his cheeks. His bow tie suddenly looked too tight, as though it had begun constricting the moment she said the words. You work at the hospital, he said quietly, though he wasn't really asking. I do, and we've met, he said again, softer still. Yes. The weight of that yes landed between them with the heaviness of an overdue realization. Claire watched as understanding washed across his face, not sudden like lightning, but slow and undeniable, like dawn creeping over a horizon. She saw the exact moment he remembered his own offhand remark. The joke. The chuckles in the office. The assumption wrapped neatly inside a single sentence. Most of them won't even know what to wear. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, an instinctive reaction to shame he wasn't used to feeling. He looked down, then back at her. His voice cracked, then steadied. Claire, I didn't know. I truly didn't realize. I know, she said simply. That's the point. Hannah shifted her weight beside her mother, but didn't speak. This was Claire's moment. Ethan swallowed. He'd faced CEOs, legislators, entire rooms of skeptical investors, but nothing had ever made him look so unsteady. He looked at her again, more closely this time. Not at the gown, not at the elegance she wore tonight, but at her eyes. Her posture, the quiet strength that had always been there, hidden in plain sight. He saw her. For the first time, you look. Claire didn't blush. She didn't shrink. She simply nodded once, accepting the compliment for what it was, not redemption, but recognition. Well, she said softly, now you know we can dress ourselves. His exhale was quiet. Almost a laugh, but tinged with something heavier, humility, regret, maybe both. I deserved that, he admitted. She tilted her head. I didn't say it to punish you. I know. For a long, suspended moment, they stood facing each other. The music swelling gently behind them. Conversations weaving in and out like background threads. People glanced, noticing the stillness between them, but no one interrupted. And then, Ethan's expression changed, just slightly. A shift. A realization that hadn't quite finished forming yet. Claire, he said slowly, would you? But before he could finish the thought, someone called his name sharply from across the ballroom. Ethan, we need you for a quick photo with the donors. He closed his eyes for a second, visibly torn, then opened them again. May I find you later? He asked. Claire gave a small shrug, neither yes nor no. We'll see, she said, and with that, she turned slightly toward Hannah. A motion so subtle yet final enough to leave him standing there, caught between the world he knew and the woman he'd never bothered to see. He watched her walk away, heart pounding with something he didn't yet understand. But he would, soon enough. The drive home should have cleared Ethan's mind. Usually, the stretch from downtown Denver toward the foothills worked like a natural reset button, the city lights shrinking behind him, the mountains rising ahead like dark, steady guardians. But tonight, the road blurred into nothing more than a ribbon his car followed automatically. All he could see was Claire, not the dress, not the elegance, not the surprise of it all. Just her expression when she'd said, "We've met, you just didn't notice." The words landed again with the same dull, heavy thud they'd made in the ballroom. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, jaw clenching. He could still feel the warmth of the moment and the cold edge of realization slicing right behind it. When he finally pulled into the long driveway leading to his house, the motion sensor lights brightened across the stone walkway. The modern glass facade reflected the night sky, black and silver, like a quiet reproach. He stepped out into the freezing air, but even the sting of cold couldn't shake loose the knot inside him. Inside the house, he didn't turn on many lights, just the ones he needed. He walked through the foyer, down the hallway, then out onto the deck where the city sprawled below, glittering like an overturned jewelry box. He leaned on the railing, breath fogging in the sharp winter air. He'd spent years hosting galas, speaking eloquently about compassion while confidently assuming he understood the struggles of the people his foundation helped. He'd built an empire on innovation and hard work, convinced he still saw the world the way he had before he'd made his first million. But tonight, with her words replaying on a relentless loop, he finally heard the truth. He had blind spots as wide as canyons. He closed his eyes. Most of them won't even know what to wear. He had said it casually, carelessly. A throwaway remark wrapped in humor. The kind of thing men in his circle said all the time without thinking twice. But now, hearing it again in his head, it sounded different. It sounded ugly. It sounded like someone he didn't want to be. With a frustrated exhale, he pushed off the railing and went inside, heading straight for his home office. The room welcomed him with its usual sleek order glass desk, leather chair, 2 monitors glowing faintly in sleep mode. He pressed a key. The screens woke up. He typed in the hospital staff directory. He wasn't even sure what he was looking for at first. A last name, maybe. A picture. A piece of paper that would help him understand who she was beyond the woman in the navy gown. He searched Claire. 3 results. Then he clicked on the second one, Claire Morrison. Night janitorial staff. Hired 2 years ago. 2. 11 p.m. 7 a.m. Supervisor notes. Punctual. Reliable. Quiet. Strong work ethic. He scanned farther down the page. Employment history. Self-employed seamstress, alterations and custom work, 12 years. His breath caught slightly. A seamstress. For 12 years. Running her own small business. Making dresses. Creating beauty. Offering the same kind of care and detail he'd admired without hesitation earlier that evening. And then, nothing. The next line jumped forward several years. What had happened? Why the shift from a creative vocation to custodial night work? What had she endured in the space between those lines? He didn't know her story. He hadn't cared enough to notice. His father's face came to him suddenly, not the worn smile from childhood, but the look the man used to get when customers at the hardware store treated him like an afterthought. Underpaid. Overlooked. Replaceable. His father had worked 2 jobs his whole life. Ethan had sworn, as a boy, that he would never become the kind of successful man who forgot the people who made his life run smoothly. And here he was, doing exactly that. Ethan sank into the leather chair, staring at the staff directory. A quiet shame settled in his chest. Heavy, unfamiliar, but deserved. He rubbed his hands over his face. "You idiot," he muttered under his breath. But shame alone wasn't useful. It wasn't enough to sit here, wallowing. That would be just another way of centering himself in a moment that wasn't about him. He had to do something. Not to fix it, because this wasn't something a billionaire could fix with a donation or a check, but to acknowledge it. He opened a blank email. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he finally began to type. Subject: Request for a meeting with Claire Morrison. He stared at the words for a moment, resisting the instinct to make the message sound polished or corporate. He didn't want polished. He wanted honest. He typed, "Hi Karen. I'd like to meet with Claire Morrison during her next shift. This isn't disciplinary, nor is it about job performance. I would like to speak with her personally, to offer an apology, and to listen. Please let me know when she's on site next, and whether she's comfortable with the meeting." He signed it simply, Ethan. Before he could rationalize it, or soften the language, or overthink any of it, he hit send. The quiet whoosh of the outgoing message echoed more loudly than it should have in the dim office. He leaned back, letting out a slow breath. He could brush this off. Many men in his position would. He could bury the embarrassment, forget the moment, move on with his life unchanged. But he didn't want to. Something about the way she had looked at him, steady, calm, unafraid, had carved itself into a part of him he hadn't visited in years. He wanted to be the kind of man who saw people, all people, even the ones who scrubbed floors after midnight, maybe especially them. Outside the office window, the city lights pulsed gently in the cold night air. Ethan watched them, feeling the shift inside him solidify into something he couldn't name yet but knew he needed to follow. He didn't know what would happen next. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't ignore the truth anymore. And he wouldn't ignore Claire Morrison ever again. The quietest hours at the hospital came just before dawn, when the hallways felt hollow, when the vending machines hummed like tired insects, and when even the overhead lights seemed to dim in sympathy with everyone working the night shift. Claire stood alone in a staff restroom on the third floor, refilling the paper towel dispenser. Her shoulders ached from the long night. Her feet throbbed inside her old sneakers. She could already feel the promise of sleep tugging at her like a warm blanket waiting at home. The metal dispenser clicked shut. She reached for her cart, ready to move on. "Claire?" She froze. His voice didn't belong in this building, at this hour, or in this fluorescent-lit world at all. She turned slowly, and there he was. Ethan Caldwell stood in the doorway, wearing jeans and a charcoal sweater, hands shoved into his pockets like a man unsure of his place. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it too many times. He looked wrong in this setting. Out of place. Too polished and too burdened at the same time. She blinked, unsure whether she was dreaming or exhausted. "Mr. Caldwell?" Her voice came out flatter than she intended. His lips curved into a small, uneasy smile. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." "You did," she said honestly. He winced. "Fair enough." A beat passed, awkward and heavy. "I got approval to talk with you during your shift," he added, gesturing vaguely down the hall. "Would you mind joining me in the cafeteria? It's empty." Claire hesitated. The restroom door still hung ajar beside her. Her mop bucket creaked faintly, the water inside rippling as if reacting to her hesitation. She wasn't afraid of him. She simply wasn't sure she wanted whatever this conversation was about to be. But she nodded. Politeness was embedded in her. Even when she didn't owe it, they walked toward the cafeteria in silence. The echo of their footsteps filled the hallway, his steady, hers lighter, quicker. When they reached the wide room, with its rows of tables and humming refrigerators, Ethan held out a chair for her. She didn't sit, not until he sat first. When she finally lowered herself into the chair, she kept her mop beside her, leaning against the frame like a quiet reminder of where she belonged, or where he thought she belonged. Ethan folded his hands on the table, then unfolded them, then folded them again. He looked nothing like the smooth, articulate host from the gala. For the first time, he looked human. "I owe you an apology," he began. Claire didn't speak. She didn't help him. He swallowed, eyes flicking downward. "What I said in the office about staff not knowing what to wear, it was careless. It was ignorant, and I'm ashamed of it." Her jaw flexed slightly, but she still didn't interrupt. He took a breath. "But it wasn't just the comment. It's bigger than that." She waited. "I've been walking past people like you my entire life," he said quietly. "Staff who clean after hours. Workers who keep the world turning while people like me barely acknowledge them. I thought of myself as a good man, but," he shook his head, "I didn't see you. Not because I didn't want to, but because I never learned to look." The cafeteria clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Claire crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Caldwell," she began. He looked up, hopeful. Too hopeful. She finished. "I didn't need you to think I was beautiful in a dress." His breath stilled. "I needed you to see me when I was in my uniform." The words weren't sharp, they weren't even angry. They were worse. They were honest. Ethan's shoulders sank, not in defeat, but in understanding. "You're right," he whispered. Her fingers tightened around her elbow. "That night wasn't about impressing you. It wasn't even about proving you wrong. It was about remembering who I used to be. I've spent years being invisible. The gala wasn't for your eyes. It was for mine. He nodded slowly, absorbing her words like someone bracing against an incoming tide. I don't want to just apologize, he said finally. I want to do something different. I want to. But she lifted a hand, stopping him. No, she said softly but firmly. He blinked, surprised. No. What? No, to whatever you're about to offer. He frowned, unsure. I wasn't. Yes, she corrected gently. You were. Ethan leaned back slightly, the realization dawning. She continued. I've heard that tone before. I've seen that expression. When people with privilege want to fix something by throwing money at it so they can feel better. He opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. If this is about easing your conscience with charity, she said, meeting his gaze head-on, I'm not interested. The words landed like a soft hammer, not loud, but final. Ethan exhaled, long and slow, like someone trying to find footing on shifting ground. That's not what I want, he said quietly. No, she asked. No, he repeated. This isn't charity. This isn't about my conscience. This is about me realizing I've failed at something basic, seeing the people in front of me. And I want to learn how not to make that mistake again. Number 6. Claire searched his face, looking for the cracks, the insincerity, the glossed-over ease of a man used to being believed. But what she found instead was discomfort. She didn't soften, but she listened. Then start by seeing me now, she said. Ethan nodded, chastened yet intent. All right. A moment of silence stretched between them, thin as a thread. Claire let out a breath. It's late. I need to finish my shift. Of course. He stood quickly, stepping aside as though afraid to disrupt her path again. But before she could leave the table, he spoke once more. Claire, he said softly, thank you for giving me the chance to say this. She didn't smile, but she didn't walk away immediately either. Just don't make promises you can't keep, she said quietly. Then she turned, mop in hand, and crossed the cafeteria floor, her silhouette framed by the cold glow of the vending machines. Ethan watched her go, understanding for the first time in his life that apologies were not currency and forgiveness was not guaranteed. But change? Change was still on the table. The next night, Claire returned to her rounds with a knot in her stomach she couldn't quite loosen. She'd replayed the cafeteria conversation in her head until her thoughts felt frayed, like overused thread. She wasn't sure what unsettled her more, Ethan's apology, or the sincerity she thought she'd seen in his face. Sincerity was dangerous. It made you hope. Hope was even more dangerous. She wheeled her cart down the quiet hallway toward the pediatric wing. The walls were painted with fading murals, cartoon animals, balloon shapes, stars. They looked tired, like they had carried too many children's stories over too many long nights. She was restocking soap dispensers when she heard steps behind her. Claire? She didn't jump this time, but her shoulders tightened. Ethan stood at the end of the hallway, dressed in a navy jacket, hands tucked awkwardly into his pockets. He looked more prepared tonight, as if he'd rehearsed how to appear unassuming in a place where he didn't belong after dark. She exhaled. You're here again? I asked the operations manager when you'd be on this floor, he said. She said now was a good time. Claire turned back to the soap dispenser. I'm working. I know. He hesitated. May I walk with you? She didn't answer immediately, but she didn't say no. They moved down the hallway side by side, her pushing the cart, him keeping a respectful distance. The overhead lights flickered gently, buzzing the way only hospital lights could. After a few steps, he cleared his throat. I want to propose something, he said. Claire stiffened. Mr. Caldwell, it's not charity. He interrupted quickly. That's exactly what someone offering charity would say. He winced. Fair. But it's not. She continued walking, giving him silence to fill. He did. There's a project I've been trying to get off the ground for months. A redesign of the family lounge outside the pediatric wing. Claire paused at the wording. Redesign? He nodded. Right now, it's a depressing room with vinyl chairs from the early 2000s and fluorescent lights that make everyone look sick even when they're healthy. She couldn't help a tiny, reluctant smile. That's accurate. The budget is small, he admitted. Too small for any reputable design firm to take seriously. They'd lose money on it. That sounds like a problem, she said. It is, he glanced at her. Unless I stop thinking like a man who hires firms and start thinking like someone who's actually watched this place at 2 in the morning. Claire bristled slightly. And what do you think you've watched? You, he said simply. Your work. Your skill. Your attention to detail. She stopped walking. He stopped too. I saw your dress, he continued. But it wasn't just that. I read your employment file. I saw the years you spent running your own alterations shop. The care you put into things. The precision. She crossed her arms. Skills don't vanish, he replied. They get buried under circumstance. His voice held no pity, just observation. Claire hated that it made something inside her twist. He gestured gently toward the Pediatric Wings family lounge just a few yards away. She followed his gaze. The frosted glass window glowed with old yellow light behind the outdated furniture. I want to ask if you'd consider leading the redesign, he said. Her breath caught. Paid, he added. As a contractor, not as staff, not as a favor, not as a handout. She swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around her elbows. He continued. You'd have full creative control within budget. Colors, layout, materials, everything. I want families to walk into a room that feels comforting. A room someone designed with heart, not a committee. The hallway felt too quiet. Even the lights seemed to pause. Her instinct rose first, the one that had protected her for years. No, she said. Ethan blinked. No? No, she repeated, her voice thin. I can't. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected resistance. May I ask why? Bull. She looked away, gripping the handle of the cart. Because I haven't designed anything in years. Because if I fail, it's public. Because people will talk. Talk? He asked softly. They'll say a janitor tried to play decorator. The words came sharper than she intended. They'll say I was given a role I didn't earn. They'll say the only reason I got it was because the millionaire felt guilty. Ethan stepped closer, but not too close. Claire, I'm not asking you because of guilt. I'm asking you because I think you're the best person for the job. Her throat tightened. You don't know that. You barely know me. He shook his head. I know enough to see that you understand how spaces affect people. Your gown wasn't fancy. It was thoughtful, structured, balanced. Made by someone who sees with intention. A long silence stretched between them. Claire exhaled shakily. I've spent so long being the person who cleans up other people's messes, she said quietly. I'm not sure I remember how to be the one who decides what gets built. Ethan absorbed the words with surprising gentleness. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, he said. Or tomorrow. Take all the time you need. She didn't look at him. Not directly. Just consider it, he added softly. Not for me. For you. Claire stared toward the dim family lounge, the dull chairs, the tired art prints, the carpet worn thin by worry and waiting. She thought of families sitting there at 3 in the morning, clutching hope like a fraying rope. She thought of the kind of space she wished she'd had during the worst years of her life when Mark was sick. Could she make something better for someone else? She didn't know. Not yet. I'll think about it, she whispered. That's all I ask, Ethan said. He gave her a small nod, no pressure, no grand gesture, then turned down the hallway, leaving her alone with the hum of the lights and the echo of a door she wasn't sure she could step through. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to try. Claire didn't sleep well after Ethan's offer. She lay awake long after dawn, staring at the faint cracks in her bedroom ceiling, listening to Hannah breathe softly down the hallway. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the family lounge, that dull, lifeless, little box of a room, and the fear of touching it, the fear of trying, the fear of wanting something she wasn't sure she deserved anymore. That afternoon, Hannah found her standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at a mug of coffee gone cold. "You okay?" her daughter asked. Claire took a breath. "Ethan offered me a job, not janitorial work." Hannah blinked. Then blinked again. "Design? Like, actual design? He wants me to redo the family lounge," Claire said. "Paid. Contracted." Hannah's face lit up immediately. "Mom, that's huge. That's exactly what you do." Claire shook her head, rubbing a hand over her forehead. "I haven't done it in years. And this isn't a bridal shop or a little studio. It's a hospital. They'll laugh. Or judge. Or think I don't belong." "Mom," Hannah said firmly, "you've been making people feel comfortable and beautiful your whole life. Just not in hospitals." Claire wanted to believe her. But years of being invisible had trained her not to trust ambition, her own most of all. Later that evening, while Hannah worked on homework at the kitchen table, Claire climbed into the attic storage space. The air smelled of dust and old cardboard. In the back corner, behind holiday decorations and unused blankets, she found a battered plastic bin labeled shop stuff. Her chest tightened. Inside were old sketchbooks, the kind she had once carried everywhere. She opened one slowly, and the past spilled out in pencil lines and soft watercolor washes. Hand-drawn bridal gowns, floor plans for tiny boutiques, living rooms built with light and warmth, ideas she once believed would turn into a long career. She flipped through them, feeling something loosen in her chest. Something old and tender. She didn't cry, but her breath caught more than once. Downstairs, when the house finally quieted, she spread the sketchbooks across her bed. Beside them, she laid out blank sheets of paper and her last surviving set of soft graphite pencils, the ones she'd saved even after letting go of her shop. She wasn't sure why. Maybe some part of her had always known she'd need them again. She began to sketch, not fast, not confidently, but honestly. The family lounge slowly formed beneath her hand, not the version that existed now, with its sharp lighting and stiff chairs, but a warmer one. She sketched softer lamps that cast golden pools of light instead of harsh overhead glare. She drew a row of rocking chairs, sturdy, simple ones for parents who held babies through long nights. She imagined a wall of framed drawings made by children on the pediatric floor, their crayon colors turned into an art display of courage. She added a corner with a small bookshelf. Some plants. A place where families could breathe. Her pencil moved more steadily as the hours passed. By the time she put it down, dawn was whispering at the windows. She stared at the sketches spread across the bed. They weren't perfect, but they were hers, and they were good. 2 days later, Claire stood in front of the hospital's administrative wing. She wore jeans, a soft gray sweater, and the nicest pair of boots she owned. No uniform, no badge clipped to her pocket. Her hands trembled slightly, holding a folder pressed against her side. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say, and what she wouldn't say. She wasn't asking for permission. She wasn't asking for approval. She wasn't asking for rescue. She wanted to see if Ethan meant what he said and if she did too. At the receptionist's desk, she cleared her throat. "I'm here to see Mr. Caldwell. He's expecting me." The receptionist checked the calendar, then nodded. "Go right in. Down the hall. Second door on the left." Claire nodded, smoothing her sweater once before walking. The hallway felt different in daylight. The windows cast sharp rectangles of sun across the floor. Doctors and administrators hurried past, and for once, Claire didn't lower her gaze. She kept walking, folder tucked tight under her arm. Outside Ethan's office, she paused. Not from fear, but from resolve. She knocked. "Come in," Ethan called. She stepped inside. Ethan stood from behind his desk, surprise flickering through his expression. "Claire." She held up a hand, stopping him gently. "I'm here because I have something to say." He nodded immediately. "Please." She approached the desk, placing the folder on its polished surface. She opened it, laying out 3 sketches, not perfect, not finished, but real. "These are rough ideas," she said. "But if we're going to do this, I have conditions." Ethan didn't interrupt. She continued, 1. I'm not doing this as a favor to you. If I take this job, it's because I'm capable, not because you feel guilty. He nodded. 2. I get full creative control. You don't approve fabric swatches or chair colors. This space is for families, not donors. I answer to the people who sit in that room at 3 in the morning, not the ones who visit it during tours. A flicker of admiration moved across Ethan's face. 3. My role is official. Contract signed. Rate clearly stated. No backdoor generosity. No special treatment. Absolutely, he said quietly. 4. She added, taking a breath. If anyone asks why I was chosen, you tell them the truth. That you hired me because of my skills, not because of charity. He held her gaze. I can do that. A long beat passed. So long, Claire wondered if she'd pushed too hard. Then Ethan whispered, almost reverently, these sketches are beautiful. She looked away, heat rising in her cheeks. They're just drafts. No, he said. Claire pressed her lips together. I said I haven't accepted yet. I need time. I need to know I can do this without losing myself again. Ethan nodded slowly. Take all the time you need. She gathered the folder, though she left one sketch on the desk, a deliberate choice she didn't entirely understand yet. Ethan touched the page lightly, like it was something fragile. As she reached the doorway, he called softly, Claire? She turned. No matter what you decide, he said, I'm grateful you walked in here today. She didn't smile. But something inside her, something long silent, lifted its head just slightly. I'll let you know, she said, and she walked out, step steady, leaving behind the sharp scent of pencil lead, the faint shadow of courage, and a man staring at a sketch that made him believe the room. And maybe both their lives could become something warmer. When Claire returned to Ethan's office the next afternoon, the winter sun was slipping behind the Denver skyline, turning the windows into long panes of pale gold. The building felt quieter at this hour, as if the day had exhaled and left space for something new to happen. She stepped inside, carrying the same folder, though this time her posture was steadier, her stride more deliberate. Ethan rose from his desk immediately. Claire, he said, not with surprise but with intention. Let's sit, she replied, motioning toward the small meeting table by the window. He followed her lead without hesitation. Claire placed a neatly typed document on the table, a list of terms written in simple language, but firm. There was no tremor in her voice when she began. Before I say yes to anything, I want to be clear about the conditions. These aren't negotiable. Ethan folded his hands. I'm listening. She met his eyes. First, I'm to be paid fairly, not as a volunteer, not as a special courtesy. I want the same hourly or project-based rate any outside design consultant would get. Of course, Ethan said. You'll set your rate. Second, she continued, sliding the paper closer to him. My name goes on the project plaque. Not hidden, not omitted, not filed under miscellaneous staff contributions. As the designer. Ethan didn't even blink. Agreed. Agreed. Claire nodded once, then took a breath. Third, I keep my janitorial job. At least until I choose otherwise. I need the stability. This project alone can't replace my entire income, and I won't risk my daughter's future on a hope. I'd never ask you to give it up unless you wanted to, Ethan replied, softer this time. And fourth, Claire said, her voice tightening slightly, this stays professional. No blurred lines, no favors. No. Narratives about the millionaire giving the janitor a leg up. That story always ends with the woman losing her dignity. Ethan sat back slowly, absorbing her words. He didn't seem offended. He seemed humbled. Claire, he said quietly, I don't want a story like that either. I'm not interested in playing savior. I want to work with you because the hospital needs a space designed by someone who understands care in ways the rest of us overlook. A small warmth spread along the edges of her ribs, not enough to comfort, but enough to loosen a single knot of worry. She pulled out the lounge floor plan. A rectangular room, 480 square feet. 2 windows. 1 old radiator. A cluster of uncomfortable chairs. A vending machine that hummed too loudly. She tapped the corner of the page. Lighting is the biggest issue. Those fluorescent panels create a harsh, clinical feeling. Parents who sleep here overnight end up with headaches. What would you replace them with? Ethan asked. Warm LED sconces along the walls. A pair of standing lamps with soft fabric shades. A dimmer switch, if the budget allows. He nodded, making notes. What's the cost range? About $800 total if we source carefully. She moved to the seating layout. These vinyl chairs need to go. They're easy to clean, but they send the wrong message. Parents aren't here for comfort, they're here for survival. They deserve something that doesn't make them feel like burdens. What would you choose instead? He asked. Rocking chairs for the infant families. And padded armchairs with washable slipcovers. They look like home. They feel like home. People cling to anything that feels familiar during a crisis. She watched him as she spoke. He wasn't judging. He wasn't pretending to know better. He wasn't waiting to interrupt. He was listening. Really listening, in a way she hadn't expected from a man with a calendar full of meetings and a reputation for being efficient to a fault. She moved her pencil across the page, adjusting one line. The wall by the windows should hold framed drawings from the kids. Not the neat, curated ones, the real ones. Crayon scribbles that show how a child sees their world. Hope doesn't come from expensive art. It comes from recognition. Recognition, Ethan echoed. I like that. Claire shifted, aware of something changing in the room, not between them, but around them. The project was becoming real. And with each detail she explained, she felt herself standing a little taller. Ethan leaned forward. Warm neutrals, she said. Soft beige, muted blues. Tired eyes should rest when they walk in. That's beautiful, he murmured. It's practical. She corrected. But there was a faint smile at the edge of her expression. They talked budget numbers, material durability, square footage constraints. Claire explained how even the angle of a chair can say something, whether it welcomes a grieving parent or sends them deeper into isolation. She demonstrated by adjusting one of the office chairs, showing how a slight forward tilt invites a person inward instead of pushing them away. Ethan watched her hands move, recognizing that she wasn't just rearranging chairs. She was rearranging experiences, shaping safety where fear usually lived. When she finished, the room held a long, thoughtful silence. Ethan stood first. Then Claire rose as well. He extended his hand. We'll do it your way, Claire. Her fingers hovered for a beat before meeting his. Then let's make a room, she said softly, where no one feels invisible. Their handshake wasn't delicate. It wasn't tentative. It was steady, perfectly steady, like two people agreeing to build something neither could build alone. She stepped back, gathering her sketches. Ethan walked her to the door but didn't crowd her, didn't try to make the moment more than it was. Still, as she turned to leave, something flickered in his eyes. Respect, recognition, and the quiet beginning of something neither of them dared name yet. Claire walked down the hallway with the soft confidence of someone who had finally reclaimed a piece of herself. But as she reached the elevator and the doors slid shut, a new thought settled heavy, unexpected, thrilling. If this room could change, maybe she could too. And she wasn't sure if that idea excited her or terrified her more. The elevator hummed downward. Her reflection trembled faintly in the metal doors. Change was coming. She could feel it. But she didn't know yet what it would ask of her. And that uncertainty followed her like a whisper as the doors opened. In the weeks that followed, Claire's life fell into a strange, beautiful rhythm, half familiar, half entirely new. By day, she worked on sketches and material lists. By night, she slipped back into her custodial uniform, pushing her cart quietly through the same hallways she now studied through a designer's eyes. The family lounge became her heartbeat. The first Saturday morning, she stood in the fabric store on Colfax Avenue, fingertips brushing along bolts of upholstery, soft earth tones, muted blues, warm tops. She measured out yards of textured fabric, mindful of durability and budget. A young clerk hovered beside her. "Starting a home project?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, A hospital project. The clerk blinked, surprised but impressed. That's big. Claire only smiled softly. It matters. Back at the hospital, the maintenance crew gathered around her as she showed them paint samples spread across a rolling cart. Men in denim jackets and work boots studied her choices thoughtfully. This one, she said, pointing to a shade of warm sand. It softens the shadows. Parents spend long nights in this room. They need a color that doesn't fight their eyes. The crew nodded. No one questioned why the night shift janitor was suddenly giving design direction. The respect in their glances surprised her more than she admitted. While painters worked, Claire solicited quiet feedback from people who actually used the lounge. Nurses finishing 12-hour shifts, social workers who carried too many stories in their eyes, and weary parents clutching coffee cups. One mother said, "The chairs hurt your back after an hour, and there's nowhere to put your bag without feeling like you're in the way." Claire noted everything. A week later, she returned with slipcover samples and a layout that created a small, protected nook near the windows, a place for privacy without feeling exiled. Parents smiled at the change even before the furniture arrived. But not everyone smiled. During a walk-through with administrators, a man in a stiff suit frowned at the dimmer switches being installed. "Who approved this?" he asked sharply. "I did," Claire replied. Her voice was calm, steady. The administrator blinked. "You did? With respect, you're janitorial. Do you even know the fire code regulations for this wing?" The words hit her like a cold slap, sharp and familiar. Before she could speak, Ethan appeared at her side, having overheard. "She's the lead designer on this project," he said, his voice firm enough to stop the room. "If you have concerns, you bring them to both of us." The administrator straightened, muttering something about reviewing paperwork, then stepped aside. Claire kept her expression neutral, but inside, something warm and fragile flickered. Not gratitude, recognition. The kind that didn't come wrapped in pity or performance. When she continued explaining the lighting plan, Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't take over. He simply listened, hands in pockets, eyes steady. And when she caught his gaze, something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not rescue, but respect. As January turned into February, the room transformed piece by piece. The fluorescent panels came down first, replaced by sconces with soft parchment shades. For the first time in years, the room glowed instead of glared. Next came the chairs, deep, padded armchairs with washable slipcovers that whispered comfort the moment you looked at them. A row of rocking chairs lined the far wall, ready for anxious parents and restless babies. Claire added a bookshelf with worn but beloved classics, a basket of knitted blankets donated by local volunteers, and a small table with a real coffee station, ceramic mugs instead of flimsy foam cups. She arranged them carefully, touching each one as if reminding it to stay warm. The last thing she installed was the wall of photographs, families who had once paced these same hallways, now smiling at home with healthy children. Some pictures were only a few months old. Some were from decades ago. Every frame carried a story. When she stepped back and looked at the room as a whole, her throat tightened. It didn't look like a hospital space. It looked like a haven, her haven. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was set for a Tuesday afternoon. A modest crowd gathered, nurses still in scrubs, administrators, maintenance workers, a few families, and members of the pediatric unit staff. Claire wore a simple blouse and slacks, hands folded in front of her as she stood on the edges of the group. The hospital director gave a short speech about community care. Ethan spoke next, thanking donors and staff. But Claire noticed something different in his tone, softer, more personal. Not about money, but about meaning. Then came the unveiling. A small velvet cloth was pulled from the wall, revealing the plaque. Family Lounge Renovation. Designed by Claire Morrison, 2026. For a moment, Claire forgot how to breathe. Her name, not tucked away, not hidden, not erased. Her name in metal, her work, her vision, her return to herself. Applause rose around her, a warm, rolling sound that filled the room. Nurses clapped with pride. Maintenance workers cheered softly from the back. Even the children's wing staff smiled knowingly. She swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Across the room, Ethan was already looking at her. And once again, just like the night of the gala, he couldn't speak. Not because he didn't recognize her, but because he finally did. She looked away, breath shaking, overwhelmed but steady. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was a room where people were meant to be seen. And somehow, quietly, steadily, she had become one of them. But the applause hadn't stopped yet, and the feeling rising in her chest, pride, disbelief, something shimmering and new, wasn't finished with her either. Spring returned to Denver in soft colors, pale sunlight brushing the mountains, melting the last patches of snow into thin silver streams along the sidewalks. One afternoon, as Claire sorted weekend laundry, the familiar white envelope slid through the mail slot. Heavy paper, embossed seal. She didn't need to look twice. The annual Caldwell Children's Fund Gala. A year ago, the invitation had felt like a dare. A fragile window into a world she didn't believe she had permission to enter. Now, it felt simply like, when she called down the hallway, "Hannah, it's here." Her daughter answered over video chat, instead hair tied back, wearing pale blue scrubs. "Mom, I wish I could go with you," Hannah said breathlessly between rotations. Behind her, the bustle of the hospital echoed faintly. "But we've got evening clinicals this week. Post-op patients. It's chaos." Claire smiled with a warmth that came easily now. "Honey, you're where you need to be." "How about you?" Hannah pressed. "You'll go, right?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I'll go." "Good," Hannah said with a teasing grin. "You belong there, Mom." After the call ended, the house fell into a thoughtful quiet. Claire walked to the bedroom closet, sliding open the door. The navy gown hung toward the back, protected in its plastic sleeve. She reached for it gently, letting the fabric spill into her hands like a memory she had once held too tightly. It still fit her perfectly, still looked elegant, still whispered of the night she had dared to be seen. But as she stood in front of the mirror, something inside her shifted. For the first time, the gown didn't feel like armor. It simply felt like a dress, beautiful, yes, but no longer the thing that determined whether she deserved to be in a room. She set it on the bed. Then, with calm certainty, she chose a different outfit. A simple midnight blue skirt, a soft ivory blouse, a pair of modest heels she could walk in without wincing. Elegant, understated, entirely her. That evening, she arrived at the historic hotel just as the city lights blinked awake. Couples stepped gracefully from black cars. Photographers clustered near the entrance. The marble floors gleamed like still water. Yet Claire didn't pause this time. She walked through the revolving door with slow, steady confidence. Not to hide. Not to prove. Not to impress. Just to be. Inside the ballroom, warm golden light reflected off crystal chandeliers. A jazz trio played softly. Voices mingled with laughter. Champagne glasses chimed. It was beautiful, breathtaking, even, but it no longer overwhelmed her. She was present, grounded. A group of nurses near the entrance spotted her first. "Claire," one called, waving her over. "The lounge is still the only room on this floor that people actually fight to stay in. And the lamps?" another added. "Families guard them like treasure." Their affection warmed her from the inside out. Then a woman she didn't recognize approached, hands clasping Claire's. Her eyes shone. "My son, we spent 3 weeks here last fall," she said. "That room you made?" Claire's breath hitched. She managed a quiet, "I'm glad it helped." As the program began, Ethan stepped onto the stage. He wore a tux again, bow tie straight this time. Posture tall, in a way that carried less ego than it once had. His voice spread across the ballroom with calm authority. He spoke of hospital expansions, new programs, success stories, and then his tone shifted. "A year ago," he began, "I made a careless comment." The room hushed. "I said that some of our staff wouldn't know what to wear to an event like this." A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Ethan continued, deliberate and unflinching. "I was wrong. And more importantly, someone showed me how wrong I was, not with anger, but with grace." Not, he paused, and with a handmade dress. Soft laughter broke the tension. Claire felt her face warm, but she didn't look away. Tonight, Ethan said, I want to recognize the person who taught me what it means to truly see the people who keep this hospital running. Not their uniforms, not their titles, but their humanity, their gifts, their quiet brilliance. He turned, eyes finding Claire. Claire Morrison, would you stand for a moment? She rose slowly, embarrassed and grounded at once. Applause swelled, sincere and warm, carrying across the ballroom like a tide. She didn't duck her head, didn't shrink. She stood in her simple blouse and skirt and allowed herself one small, steady smile. Not for Ethan, not for the crowd. For herself. Later, on the balcony overlooking the city, Claire leaned her arms on the railing, letting the cool night air settle into her lungs. Denver stretched out below in a scatter of lights, quiet and alive at the same time. Footsteps approached softly behind her. Ethan. He stopped a respectful distance away. I meant every word, he said quietly. I know, she replied. For a moment, they simply looked at the city. Not at each other. Not at the memory of a ballroom chandelier. At the real world, the one they both lived in now, with newly adjusted vision. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice low and even. You were wrong, you know. Ethan blinked. About what? She turned to him, a calm smile shaping her lips. I always knew what to wear. She gestured lightly toward the ballroom behind them. I just needed to remember I was allowed to walk through the door. Ethan's expression softened, not with admiration, not with apology, but with understanding. A kind of understanding earned, not given. Claire brushed a strand of hair from her face, then nodded toward the ballroom. I should get back. You should, he agreed. But he didn't follow. He let her go ahead of him, because this was her moment, her night, her space to walk back into, not as a shadow, not as a guest by accident, not as someone invited to prove she belonged, but as the woman who finally did. Claire stepped through the doorway and disappeared into the warm light, her figure steady, her presence unmistakably her own, and the door closed softly behind her. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, quietly, in the spaces where we finally allow ourselves to be seen. Claire walked into that ballroom thinking she needed a dress to belong, but what she truly needed was permission to stop shrinking. And that permission didn't come from anyone else. It came from within, the moment she remembered who she used to be. Her story reminds us that dignity isn't something granted by wealth, titles, or rooms filled with polished people. It lives in the quiet courage of standing where you've been told you don't fit, and saying, softly but firmly, I'm here. I'm here. And sometimes the people who overlook us the most aren't cruel, they're simply blind in ways they've never been asked to confront. But when we show up as our truest selves, something shifts, not just for us, but for them too. May we all learn to walk through the doors life places before us. Not because we are invited, but because we deserve to be there. And may we recognize the quiet, extraordinary worth in the people who walk beside us every day. Thank you for being here with us, and for giving your time to a story that speaks to the quiet, unseen corners of everyday life. Your presence means more than you know. Every like, every share, every gentle tap on that subscribe button helps us send a little more kindness into the world, one story at a time. Thank you for listening with your heart. Thank you for choosing compassion in a world that often rushes past it. We'll be here, ready to share the next story with you.